Right, well, there's probably going to be a few more people come in, but we'll get started and go through what we're going to do today. So welcome to the Sparked HL7AU eRequesting Technical Design Group meeting for Thursday, 18th of July 2024. Pleased to see you all here. Quick summary of what we're going to go over today. First of all, we'll do the usual approval of previous minutes and any updates there. I don't think there are, but we'll cover those. And then we have three things to cover. Essentially, Michael Wilson is going to give us a quick progress checkpoint and just show us, how much we have to do in the small amount of time that's remaining. And then Brett's going to talk about system actors, what's left there, just a small part, and moving on to system obligations, which is going to form the bulk of what we're doing today. So first of all, let's get to the business of the previous minutes. So first of all, we're looking at the minutes from the 4th of July. This is the AU eRequesting TDG agenda from the 4th of July. And the minutes are there. If anyone is happy with those minutes, would they like to motion that we approve them?
I'll move. Michael Osborne.
And would somebody like to second?
I'm happy to second. Shelley Bean.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to launch the poll for the approval of the previous minutes. Just a reminder, just need to click on affirmative, negative, or abstain to approve the minutes for the 4th of July, 4th of the 7th. All right, so I'm going to close that poll in 3, 2, 1. Thanks very much. And the minutes are approved. 23 for, 9 abstained. All right, so just moving quickly on to the next one. These are the meeting minutes for the 9th of July. So the notes all down here at the bottom, including all the decisions we made on wave 2, final wave 2 decisions, and the wave 3 notes as well. Angus.
Sorry, I clicked the wrong button. I didn't mean to put my hand up.
Okay, no, good. Would you like to motion to approve the minutes then?
Yes, I motion to approve the minutes.
Thanks, Angus. Would somebody like to second?
I can second again. Shelley Bean.
Thank you. All right, just running another poll. If you would like to approve the minutes for the 9th of July.
If it's just me, I don't see a poll.
You don't?
No.
Nobody else seeing a poll? It's interesting because people are voting in it.
Ah.
Yeah, I saw it.
Oh, it's just me then. Sorry.
If you're signed in, which I don't think you are, under the eRequesting account, you might not see it, but that should be the only reason.
Move on. I've been fiddling around with my Zoom interface, so it's just me, I think.
Right. We'll close the poll in a minute anyway. 3, 2, 1. And those are approved. 21 for, 11 abstained. All right, so a couple of quick items to go through before we get into the main.
Chris, I'm happy to go through these if you want.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Michael.
So just the ballot comment, the ballot sign up is now open. So it's open until the 5th of August. We've just got a few stats on that so far. I think we've had 27 voters sign up so far from 10 organisations and 9 individual members. So that's still open. Like I said, you have to sign up during that period. You can't sign up outside of that period. So make sure if you intend to vote on AU or eRequesting that you sign up during that period. You have to be a current HL7 member to do that. Then we're going to have the ballot period run through from the 12th of August through to the 8th of September. We'll then run through a reconciliation period through till the end of October and publish our snapshot at the end of November. So the intent there is when we get to that ballot reconciliation snapshot at the end of November, we'll look at doing some testing. We'll have a connectathon not long after that, and we'll probably organise some testing events so we can actually do some testing of the specification once we've got that ballot reconciliation snapshot. We might jump on to the next one. So this is our next Connectathon that's coming up in August. This is in Brisbane. So there's actually on the 20th of August, the day before the Connectathon, we've got a day of work group meetings. Now, these will be hybrid. So if you can't make the event, you can still participate. And this is going to be a number of different working groups. So it's going to be the AU Fire working group, the AU Core technical design group, as well as our eRequesting technical design group. We're likely to have 2 sessions allocated to us for eRequesting on that. So it'll give us a good chunk of time to work through additional items for eRequesting. So definitely have that in your calendar, whether you can attend in person or not. If you're going to attend in person, make sure that you register using the Eventbrite. And that's a separate registration to the Connectathon. So the Connectathon is then the 2 days after that on the 21st and 22nd. Where we're going to be having an eRequesting track run right through those 2 days as well. So make sure you register for those. If for some reason they have sold out, you can go on the wait list by sending an email down the bottom to events@hl7.com.au. We might move on to the progress update as well. So this is where we're at now. So in the last TDG meeting, we were working through system actors and we got through the eRequesting placer, the eRequesting filler, and the eRequesting patient actor. So today we've got to finish off with the eRequesting server. And then Brett's going to take us through system obligations, and that will likely spill over into next Tuesday's meeting as well. And then we've got the 2nd of August meeting, which is our only meeting left to resolve anything else that is going to go into the ballot for comment snapshot that will be taken on the 5th of August, and we'll go through the ballot for comment. But that doesn't mean we stop working and sit on our hands. We will keep continuing to evolve AU eRequesting during that ballot period. We'll continue to work through issues and the like. So it'll just move into the next pieces of work we identify. Jump to the next one. So as before, decisions that have been made through the TDG are going into the eRequesting continuous integration build. This is available. Everyone can see those changes as they go in. A number of the decisions from the last meetings around our codes and like haven't made it in yet, but they'll be there in the near future. So just keep an eye on this and you'll see the changes come through from all our decision making. Next one. And even if you can't participate in the ballot for comment, it's really important that you provide your feedback on your eRequesting. So anything that you've identified in the specification that you don't think is quite right or needs changes, there's some gaps and the like, definitely raise those as Jira issues on the HL7 Confluence HL7 Jira systems, because that feedback will be voted on during the ballot for comment. So even if you're not a voter, you can definitely provide feedback, and that'll be available there for the voters to provide feedback. So that's open to everyone. You don't need to be a HL7 member. You just need to register for a free account, and then you can start posting feedback. And it's really important that you do that. There's at the bottom of each page in the IG, there is a propose a change button, which will take you straight to the place we need to go to provide that feedback. So definitely raise any issues you identify through that. And I think that's my update.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michael. All right, I think we're going to pass over to Brett.
Cool. Can you hear me all right? No? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks. So we are back to actors and trying to finish off this activity. So so what we can see here is things we talked about before. So we talked about the client, actors, placer, patient access, and filler. So that was we worked through that, and now we've got our discussion on this server actor that sits in the middle. So basically we have these clients connecting to the server actor, essentially in the servers providing a mechanism to exchange the service requests that we've talked about so far. So might just go to the next slide. Thanks, Chris. Cool. So in an attempt to simplify the words and not cause controversy, this is the sentence we came up with to describe what the server actor does. So primarily it's able to accept requests and make those requests available. So we've completely removed any kind of specific usage, and really these are the basic operations that the server can perform. So unnamed actors can provide requests. Tawinda?
I'd see another responsibility on a server as it's accepting the request, and if it is acting between placer and the filler, it does need to have the filler directory or diagnostic directory to be held there. So does it become a responsibility of the server to hold that directory?
I'm not sure we're putting that in scope. I don't know if anyone else
I'm wondering,
position on that.
is that for directing the service request? Is that what you're saying the directory is
Yes.
for? I know in the comments on our actual actor page we had in Confluence, I know, Phil, you had some comments too around that sort of notion of sending, receiving, and I suppose it comes into that topic as well about this being a messaging type approach versus this more of a repository where the service requests sit and they're accessed by places and fillers.
Yeah.
I'll make a comment.
Okay, I guess.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether Tailwind Singh sees it differently. In that I at least had seen it that the eRequesting server gets eRequests put into it, and fillers are registering fire notifications in that server to be made aware of those requests, if not polling it, but I'd suggest notifications is a better way, in order for them to go and retrieve the orders out of it, which are for them. I can understand labs who are maybe not engaged with fire and use existing V2 mechanisms would say to maybe Telstra Health that, no, you need to send us the orders. And that I can understand that, but I would argue that then is a different actor that we don't define or a service that on their behalf registers a notification in the fire server and gets those orders out of the fire server when they're there and sends them to that lab. I don't see that component as being part of the fire ecosystem. That's you can do that. That's a way to solve that problem, but it's not. We're not going to define how that happens. How the orders get out of the fire server and to a lab, in our view, would be the lab has registered a fire subscription, or the lab is polling the fire server to be aware of the orders, and then it goes and gets them. If you build a service that does that role for them, that's out of scope of this, and that's fine. That's kind of the way I see it, and I don't know if I'm putting words in Taylor's mouth. Is that the problem you're seeing?
I does see another, like the case towards we are discussing might be a bit in future where we send a notification or subscription can happen, but at present most of the labs will come with the scenario saying push the order to me, and whether it's HL7 or fire, they're looking at direct push from the system, because lab systems are not capable enough to or they don't have those changes available at their system at present. So in that scenario, the server responsibility does come with the scenario where they need to look for registry for all the labs who are connecting to them, and make it available that I'm the server and these are the available labs that I can push the order, or an assigned order can be pushed to this.
Because I think we'll explore that down the track for sure. In terms of like making it accessible is a pretty vague kind of statement. But and I think how we make things accessible, whether they're push or pull or those things, I think that's up for grabs in terms of what we decide is in scope for this discussion. But I think I take Angus's point too, that you can build some middleware to achieve that, based on what will be here anyway. So I don't think it stops you achieving that case. But the question whether it is we would bring that into the standard itself or not. Heath, I had you next.
Yeah, I got a number of points, but I think just on that point about the word accessible, we've got accepts is a pretty specific term. I think that's pretty clear. Even if you changed accessible to retrieved, might make it a little bit clearer, because I think the confusion here is around what is the server and what is the paradigm that we're talking about here. And we haven't gone through, I guess, an educational perspective around this, but we've made some assumptions. This server, as well as the terms that we've used before, clients, is in a REST paradigm. All right, so I think we're still getting really confused around this shift of paradigm from messaging to a RESTful paradigm. And the only other suggestion here is, and I hate to make this a late suggestion, but changing the term server to maybe a repository or something like that, to again making it clearer. I can't think of a better term other than maybe a registry or something along those lines. But so they're my two suggestions here, is really maybe if you change accessible to make diagnostic service requests to retrieve or something, or use the word retrieve somehow to make it sure that it's basically as you have to go and retrieve it, and whether the change in word on our own server will make things clearer that this is a repository model. I know you're trying to be a little bit vague because you don't necessarily wanting to talk too much about persistence, but that's why I don't know if any of that helps.
Yeah, there's some intention avoiding persistence, because Yeah, and accessible was chosen to be intentionally vague. But I think one of the main cases is to be able to retrieve it, right? And I think in reality,
I know we want to be,
it's gotta be RESTful
vague,
endpoints.
but we're also getting confused because it's not explicit.
Well, we'll take those points that will come. Yeah, maybe at the end we'll think about rewording. Yeah.
I think whether we confirm that it will not be sends. Like I'm worried that a lot of people are expecting the server to send them. I think a lot of labs expect send me the e-order, and so accessible might be vague, but is it clear that it would never be the word sends?
But even in a subscription model, you effectively are going to retrieve it. All right, you get notified, but then you have to go and retrieve it. And that, although we're not going down that route yet to include the notification part, just by changing it to retrieve kind of makes it a bit more along the lines that you have to, this is not active. Basically, this server is not active. It is just responding to requests.
Yeah, I can see that change. That you just accessible doesn't infer that you come and get it. Retrieve infers that you have to go get it.
All right. I had Rachel next, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate what Angus and Heath have already mentioned, which is I think although we want to keep this as agnostic as possible, we really need to make a decision that it's either via RESTful API or via messaging. And I think stating up front that this will be implemented using via RESTful interfaces, that then simplifies and makes everything very clear to people. I think at the moment the wording without that decision, that's what's causing the confusion here, I think. So yeah, just agreeing with what's already been said. Yeah.
It's implied by the using the term client and server in FHIR terms, but again, the educational piece around what those terms mean has not been done deliberately.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Michael, I think you were next.
Yeah, I think I'm agreeing as well. And I
That's
think
good.
one of the key things we have to support here in eRequesting is unassigned requests. So that's one of our use cases is an unassigned request. So in that scenario, the service request is created, but it's not sent to anyone. It's unassigned. It's up to the patient to decide where they're going with it. So I think exactly under this model, it is regardless of how you're notified about the service request existing for you, it's whether the patient has turned up at your site or you've got a notification saying it's been allocated to you. Either way, you have to go and request it from the server to get it. And I think also the other point here is that this role doesn't mean there is one server that sits in the middle. So this role, the placer system could have the service request where you can access it from. It could be multiple federated servers in the middle. This is not saying there is one server that sits in the middle. It's just saying there is a role where the service request will be that you will retrieve it from.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. And Roma?
I also like the retrieve. I think retrievable doesn't imply persistence because retrievable could still be a proxy interaction, right? So I don't think it's saying that that must be a repository. I think it just says that it allows you to access potentially because it has it, potentially because it proxies your query. I also like retrieve because I think that even in these calls, we are finding overlap with the HL7v2 terminology and mindset. And I think given how much of it we have here in these calls or specifically around this where we get to discuss this, if we want these definitions to be usable outside, we have to assume they're going to be read in an HL7v2 mindset, and therefore something vague like accessible I think is more likely to cause a problem for an implementing system, while retrievable, I think, tries to force that distinction between no, I'm not sending it to you. I'm a way of you getting it.
Excellent.
So I'm with Heath.
Cool. That is great. Angus. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. Just to Michael's point, Sonic doesn't support unassigned requests, but I would say we 100% support transferring requests. So again, you have to go retrieve that request. So request sent to a competing provider, we're able to retrieve that request if a patient rolls up to us. So again, there's it's never going to be sent to us. We have to go get it.
Nice. All right. Well, we've heard lots of pros to changing the word to the point where I changed the word. Are any objections to that?
I put a suggestion in the chat on
Oh,
to diagnostic service request to be retrieved. So remove makes and just and it's basically accepts diagnostic service requests and diagnostic service requests to be retrieved.
You need allows. You need verb.
Okay.
Yeah.
And allows diagnostic service requests to be retrieved.
Service to be.
That was my original proposal, but
Well, I think you want more than allows, because allows just mean yes, you're allowed to do it, but am I actually going to do it?
Enables.
I'm still not convinced we need allows at all, but
I think you do need a verb because it's well,
the verb is retrieved.
But then it should be the eRequesting service system accepts diagnostic service requests and retrieves diagnostic.
And expects diagnostic service requests to be retrieved.
Provides.
All right.
Yeah, provides
diagnostic service requests.
Retrieval.
But for provide now sounds like you're sending it again. It's going to send it to someone. I'm going to provide it to you.
Enables fine, allows fine, whatever.
I assume you're allowed, so enable.
Makes diagnostic.
Back to makes. Yeah, because I think there's an implication because enabling it to be retrieved implies that you can find it to be retrieved as well, right? Because you've got to be able to locate it. So I assume we're implying that.
I'd like to move this as it is. Any seconders? Michael?
I'll second.
There you go.
Let's go to a vote.
Oh, let's go to a vote. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, so the current motion is that we accept the definition of the eRequesting server as defined on screen. The eRequesting server system accepts diagnostic service requests and enables diagnostic service requests to be retrieved. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. Thank you. Well, that's all gone through fairly quickly, so I'm going to close that one in 3, 2, 1. And that one is approved. 31 for, 7 abstained, no negatives.
Cool, and thank you, Michael Osborne, for getting that done.
Well done.
Let's move on. Okay. Thank you. So that's actors. I think we're just gonna run with that, and obviously we have a draft for comment coming out. So feel free to obviously make suggestions. Any problems with wording and things like that, please do make a change suggestion. Say it would be better if it said something else. That's always much more appreciated in a comments rather than saying I don't like the words. So moving on to obligations. So just to frame this, this is the shortest description of obligations I can possibly give. Okay, so it's so obligations are something. It's a term used via specifications, and it's really providing a way for defining an obligation for an actor in terms of use of it and behavior around a data element in detail. So so what it lets you do is flesh out essentially obligations and responsibilities for the actors using the profiles that we've worked on. And really, primarily, this is in the fire space. It's around data exchange obligations primarily, although it does kind of also approach some data management and other uses as well, but it's really not aimed at other business uses that you might consider in a role in terms of fulfilling a clinical role or something like that. So it doesn't really address any of that. So really, it's all about the data. So yeah, in fire artifacts, this is achievable with some a thing called the obligation extension and some concepts defined as obligation codes. So it's some concepts that are defined. We're going to show some of them. There are more than what we're going to show here, but I was kind of plucked out the ones that we think are most relevant. But if you do want to explore into more detail around that stuff, there's quite a large scope in terms of material, in terms of the obligation concepts that can exist. So I might just rock on to the next slide there. So when we define obligations in the fire specification, we'll get that. I see a table there, obligations and actors listed. Essentially, each element will have some obligations attached to it. So really, that lets you say for a particular actor using that profile what their obligations are with the data. So in the obligations left column of the grid there, that's describing the concept. So that's actually a concept that has a set of meaning attached to it, and then the actor that it's referring to. So we can say, hey, the placer has this populate obligation, the filler has this handle obligation, and we'll kind of get into the details of what those things mean. But it is a way to assign those obligations to the actor, and then that will play out as a set of responsibilities for those actors in terms of things that they need to do when populating data or using data across these profiles. So it's a way to kind of expand the meaning in terms of how the data is treated and what each actor has to deal with. So obligations are split into two main types. So there's essentially producer obligations and consumer obligations. So that kind of automatically links you to the kind of places in the RESTful API that you create data to be consumed by others, or you are supplying data to another actor. That's essentially your producer obligations, and consumer obligations are when you have retrieved data or received data in some way, and what your obligations are around the use of that data on receiving. So you can see there that from the producer perspective, creates and updates for a client. You are producing data into using the profile, and you're supplying it to another actor like the server. You may also be a server in the server role and being able to supply search and read around the data. So you will be supplying data as a response to a request. So you can see it's not necessarily a client or server obligation. It depends on which side of the exchange you are. So really, it's basically if you're filling the profile with data, you have one set of obligations, and then on the consumer side, you have things when you're a server receiving a create and update request, you'll be receiving data, so you have to handle it somehow. and consume it somehow. So you need to know what your obligations are. And also, if you are a client receiving a response from a search or a read, you need to know how to handle using that data. So hopefully that kind of pictures why, when we talk about this, depending on whether you're in a client or server actor role, that will affect whether you have a consumer or producer obligations. So we're going to talk about obligations, but what it really does is imply these sort of create, update, search, read interactions as well, because we assume that's part of the client or server kind of role. So might go on from there. So this is a very small subset of what's available in terms of concepts. So I think we're going to start here, and I just want to explain these concepts a bit before we attempt to use them. I think the folks that have worked on the AE core specs have looked at this more broadly as well, so they might pipe in if they think there's other concepts we need to worry about. But these are, I kind of think, a preliminary set that might be thought about, and hopefully cover where we are at the moment. And this, of course, can be revisited, and if we think things might be different in reality. So basically, under the producer obligations, so I've got three flavors there of populating data. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, that's the full list Michael sent through on the chat. So that you will see that there's a number of different concepts in there that need some reading time to get through. Oh yeah, go on. You can frighten people, but there are a number of concepts there, and essentially there's nuance in reading those as well. So it's good to have a read through that material, because it's good background to know, and you may think that there's a better term that we should be using for some reason. So on the population side, there's really three variations of populating data that we're talking about. So basically, now this is also can be qualified by a shall or should, which is essentially a regular kind of conformance term. And I think we're probably operating in the shall space for these at the moment, unless there's big problems with that. So everything is prefixed by shall. So we have shall populate. So it means that shall populate is really meaning that this element will be populated at all times on Exchange. And we probably expect that to be populated all of the time. And it is possible to have missing or suppressed cases where there are actually reasons for something not being there. But for our mandatory elements, we would typically expect them to all be populated, right? So that's essentially an obligation around that. And there are these missing or suppressed cases where you've got either access right issues, not issues, but actual access right behavior for suppressing data that's not allowed to be seen in some way, or missing data where there's cases, there's a reason for something being missing. So it does let you exchange it, and we kind of, but the expectation is that these would always be populated, these elements that are marked as shall populate. We have this concept of populative known. This is for systems, basically, this has the option of if there's an element that is not supported in your system, so the concept doesn't exist in your system, it's okay to not populate that content. So if you have it, you will populate it. So that is a kind of nod to the fact that not every system has every piece of information, and really what we're identifying is things that can be left out because of support not being there. Heath.
Yeah, just I just perhaps trying to put the distinction between these two simply. One is populate. You must have this concept, and if you've got a value, you have to provide it. The second one, if you don't have that concept, then it's okay not to provide a value. That's really the key distinction here. So the first one, you've got to have must have that concept in your system. But if you don't have data in this particular case, that's okay. Second one is, I never have data because I don't have this field in my database.
Yeah, that's good, Heath. And yeah, and I think that's the whole support question, because the populate elements, we would expect you to implement those elements because we expect that's in every system, or you can populate it because it's a fixed concept in your system, so your system always does one particular thing. So we can populate that, with a static value even. So it's
to confirm, that means that a shell populate is stronger than must support, correct?
Well, must support's not really must support. This is a version of must support, because when you have a must support statement, it's really saying just defining what support means is part of must support, and this is one way to define it.
It's the clarification of what must support means.
Yeah.
All right. So you must support, and then you
More
have an
explicit.
obligation. You can't have an obligation without must support. Right.
Yeah.
The obligation is, this is what must support means.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. And Rachel?
Yeah, so just to clarify that any of these obligations here, the obligation to provide a mandatory data element obviously overrides any particular actor obligation that's defined in this way, I'm assuming.
Well, I think you just have to meet. Yeah, you just have to meet what it says here. So whilst if a mandatory, like we would indicate, likely every mandatory element will be marked populate, right? Because it's we expect you to fill it because it's one to one or one to many, and we expect you to fill it. So it's it's aligned with that. There is the concept of missing data, which is a thing we probably need to discuss that in more detail, but I don't think we're going to get to that in this round.
Yeah, I think at some stage we identify that relationship between cardinality and the actor obligations.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks.
And then thanks, Richard. Andy?
I guess that's related, that I can't see why you would ever not basically make equivalent the shell populate and the mandatory.
Yeah, I agree. Because if you made it one-to-one, you'd expect it to be filled in, wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, you're saying unless missing or suppressed, but in missing or suppressed, you'd put a missing or suppressed flag, thing in there and say that would be the value you would provide.
Yeah, exactly. It's still populated. It's just populated with the missing content. Yeah. Thanks, Andy. Roma, did you want to comment?
Yeah. Do you have any examples of what populate if known would actually look like practically? Because populate kind of makes sense. We expect you to have this, but what is it that we say you like? Is there something?
I can give you one for this.
If it's not, it's so not missing.
Yep. So body site is an example of that. If you don't have a body site in your database because everything is coded with a body site in it, then that is an example of, because at the moment it's must support. So we're going to go and mark that with an obligation of populate if known.
Yeah.
All right. Because one system may have a field where they actually enter in body site. Another system may not have a field where they add body site. And it's just not safe to try and synthesize some, forcing that system that doesn't have a field for body site to create one by extracting out the body site from the code that they've entered for example. So that's probably the classic example.
Yeah, that's a really good one. That's one I was going to go to too as well. And I mean, that means the system will never fill that in, right? Because they don't support it. So this is essentially giving them an option that says that's okay.
And encounters, insurance, all those things that we've kind of had some contention over are likely candidates for an if known.
Yeah, because they may be context specific use as well. So that we're kind of, and this is kind of just trying to tease out the things that will always be there and the things that may not be there due to lack of support or other reasons. Michael?
Yeah, I was going to say that the populate if known would be used on the must support elements we've identified with the 0 cardinality. So what we said, it's the cardinality is 0 to 1 or 0 to many. And what we're firming that up, making it a bit stronger, saying, well, it's not that you don't have to provide it because it's 0. What we're saying is if you have it, you must provide it in that element, right? So it's the cardinality is 0, but if you have it, you have to provide because it's important for interoperability. So that's
and allowed. All right.
And allowed. Yes, sorry. And
So-
and you're allowed to share it. Yes.
Because there's situations around missing data, or in particular suppressed data, where you don't have to provide data. Well, sorry, you shouldn't. You may not want to provide data.
Yeah.
If your access policies say this user is not allowed to see this information. So in that particular case, you're not allowed, and hence it's a if known. And that's actually the distinction between able to populate and populate. So populate actually inherits from able to populate. The populate says if you're allowed in its definition. So it's actually really important if you go to that table that Michael gave you, that you read the definition, because the actual terms that are being displayed here are actually really confusing and perhaps even misleading in times. It's the definition in the middle of that table that's actually really important to try and read and decipher.
Yeah, because eventually this will move. Like, this is not a conformance spec at the moment, right? This is really just a behavioral kind of concepts that we want to put into the standard. So, but eventually this may become a part of a conformance criteria, right? So it's really important to kind of understand when you must fill something in and when you need to support a feature is really the biggest question, right? Because if you need to support a feature, that might be a really big deal in your system. That's hard to do, right? So it's really a good time to try and indicate some of that.
So
Daniel,
my thinking is this is really complex and going to take a lot of time for people to get the gist of. And I personally, as much as we might do the theory, I think people will probably get it more as we actually start moving through and actually taking some examples.
Yeah.
I mean, I did 6 weeks worth of Conformance Fridays, or I did not all of those 6 weeks, but it took a long time to actually, even for myself presenting it, to get the gist of it.
We're going to do 15
and
minutes.
It really wasn't until we actually did stuff that we actually got the gist of it. So that would be my recommendation if we can move forward. And with these,
into the
slide
content.
is really good and important, but until we start to apply it, I think it's going to be hard for people to fathom.
Yeah, cool. I'll do this quickly then. Danielle, are you happy? You've put your hand down.
Yeah, hands down.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, cool. And so populative known is basically that gives you an opt-out if your system doesn't support the concept. Able to populate means you expect systems to implement that concept, but it won't be populated in all cases. So it would be demonstrable that you can populate that element in the cases where it's relevant, right? But we would expect your system to have that concept supported. So you would imagine some of the instances would have that element populated. On the consumer side, this is about receiving data. So we've highlighted a couple of things there. handle, is some implication that the content shouldn't be ignored and should be considered as part of the processing of the data, which is really vague, right? Because it depends on what you think that means. But what it means is really highlighting elements we expect to be used in anger, right? So it's really saying that these are elements that should be considered when you are consuming this data. If you decide that you don't care about it, that's fine, but it should be considered as part of the process. No error is a much lesser requirement. It's basically anything we've indicated as being in scope with must support tags. These obligations linked to those means you will be able to receive data in this element and not have it not fault internally, right? So you can ignore that data. But we expect you to accept it in terms of being able to consume it. So it wouldn't be okay to have your system fall over if the data was populated that we indicated would be expected to be populated. Okay, so it doesn't mean you can't do anything about that data. You might internally be able to say, I don't like what's in this field as a business outcome, but that's not what we're talking about here. So it's that's essentially outside that obligation. So primarily it's really just a don't fall over obligation in terms of you have data in there. So it's probably the least you can do is not crash when you receive the data. Going on the cases, I think hopefully this will help get into the meat of the question. So we're back to the placer actor. So really here, we were looking at the shall populate concept here. So basically we expect mandatory elements shall be implemented by the systems and populated by the systems in terms of the placer creating service requests. There is the possibility of using missing and suppressed data content, which is a way to deal with information that's missing. So the so pretty much it would be very hard to implement what we want to implement without these things being populated. Okay, so they're either mandatory elements or are necessary to get things done, right? So at the moment we've listed the elements there. So maybe just to consider some of that, does it, a service request without a code? Well, that's not very helpful. I don't know what to do. A service request without a subject, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know who's it for. A request is kind of needed to meet our cases and know, where to send the results maybe. Authored on is part of our case in terms of necessary information, dates, and acceptability of the content. Status and intent are some key required elements, essentially internal system stuff. And we have either fixed values or limited values there. Category, we had our radiology or pathology selection. So we consider we need to know that. So it needs to be populated and is required in terms of the invariance we have anyway, in terms of the content. And requisition, which was our group identifier, which was a way to group requests together. So I'll open it up. Anyone want to throw stones at that list at this point? Oh,
I'm happy to move that we accept this. I like this list.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. Obviously, yeah. If you think about it and think there's a problem later, let us know. But yeah, this Heath has moved that.
I'll second it.
Michael second. Can we run that? Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so
just accept that.
We are voting to accept this proposal on the screen. Here we go.
Okay.
you're a bit distracted and looking at YouTube, just jump back over and hit the button. Groovy, we're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And that one looks good. Approved.
Thank you. Yeah, cool.
32 for, 8 abstained. Thank you.
Nice. So, Heath.
I see there's still a little bit of chatter on the chat. I just wonder if I verbally can say what I'm trying to say back in the chat.
Go on.
The populate is not about whether it is the element has a is filled out. I don't want to use the word populate. Putting a missing data code is not sufficient to satisfy populate. You have to provide a real value within some reasonable circumstance within your system. All of these examples here, it doesn't make sense to have an order without a code, or a patient, or a requester, or an authored on, or a status, or an intent, or a category, or a requisition. And hence why we're basically saying you have to populate it. It's the only get out of free jail populate is giving you here is if you're not allowed to provide something like that. And I mean, I think that even this is silly, because this example is silly, is a subject. Might be one of those, if for some reason you have to be anonymous on this, but maybe there's some use case where maybe we need to de-identify requests or something or other for whatever reason. But
yeah,
that's the only kind of example of trying to explain this to people, is that populate is saying you always have to provide it unless there's a very good reason to not doing it. The mandatory aspect of this, the one-to-one, is the fact that you now have to say why you're not populating it. If it was 0 to 1, you don't have to provide the element at all. But all of these are 1 to 1. You're right, Andy. But if I can still suppress the subject, but because of the mandatoriness, I have to actually say why I'm suppressing it or not providing a value, a real value. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, go on, Andy.
That's not the definition we're working with. And if you go back to the definition, I think you're overlaying, it says unless missing or suppressed. So it's allowing for it to be missing. And yes, I say it's missing. And that's saying I'm allowed to do that. So
Exactly.
you're overlaying additional semantics beyond this definition.
But
and
you have
that's,
to.
So I can still populate it. That's fine. But I'm allowed to populate it with a missing value or a suppressed value, which is exactly the same semantics as I would get with mandatory.
Okay, I'll go a little bit deeper. Populate inherits from able to populate, which means that in some circumstances, you have to provide data. All right, so unfortunately, you've got to go into the inheritance of this meaning as well. So populate has the same meaning as able to populate, except with the get out of free jail on unless you have missing or suppressed data. If it was able to populate, then we would not have that missing or suppressed option. And that's the distinction between populate and able to populate. But populate inherits from able to populate. Hence, in some circumstances, you have to prove that you can provide that data. The populate, if known, is separate to that. And that's the one where, well, if your system doesn't have it, you don't have to ever provide it.
Yeah, and I think
I was just comparing it to mandatory, if it's mandatory and I don't provide this, I'm going to fail validation. So
correct.
I already have to stick something in there anyway, and I'm now able to stick in. I can stick in a real value, or I can stick in something that says no, it's missing, or it's and to.
But if it was optional, I don't provide a value at all. I don't have to say why it's missing or suppressed. I I just don't
That's
populate it, right?
right. And I
But
wasn't.
it's still an obligation of populate. In some circumstances, you have to demonstrate that you will provide one unless it's missing or suppressed.
Which is not. It's not provable. Right, so you can't test this.
That's a conformance problem.
That's a conformance problem, yeah, because I think it's highlighting expectation. Yeah, expectation is this that will be filled unless it's an exceptional case where it's missing, right? And I think that's what it's really achieving. So you would expect systems to support the concept and implement the concept, and in terms of exchange.
But you don't have to.
So if we looked at an order of what's the right word? Strictness over these terms. The most strict is able to populate. Second strict is populate, and the least strict is populate if known.
But even the definition of able to populate, it's only in some instances.
Yeah.
But the way that's being interpreted in the US and why we have advocated for the populate if known, because this is a new field that we got, a new code that we got added to the system, was that even if your system doesn't have that concept in your database, you have to still demonstrate in some circumstances that you can do it in an artificial manner just to satisfy conformance in the US. And that was problematic for people like Epic and Cerner, etc. And I don't know if anyone wants to comment on this from those organizations, but that's, I know in particular, Andrew from Epic is really hot on this, not using able to populate because it's a disaster.
Yeah, they had a switch to turn it on to show that they could pass.
Even though they didn't have any data on their screen or in the database, they just, from an integration perspective, just to satisfy conformance, they had to do that.
Yeah.
And we don't want that here.
Cool. I'm going to go on to Angus. Angus,
I'm just struggling with the notion of populate missing when you say I don't have it, and then you fill in the structure with something that says I don't have this. And how does that work as me a filling system who's trying to consume these with the handle and no error? Like, because I feel like at the moment, if you did that, my system's going to blow up, right? Because I haven't written code to deal that everywhere. And is that
you would have
do
to
I
deal
now
with...
have to write code on every mandatory element to handle the case where you've said missing data?
Yeah, correct.
So that I don't error.
Yeah, correct. And you might not accept it, right? You might say, I'm not going to process this. That's okay.
But you have to handle it.
Check it. Yeah.
So for every mandatory element, I have to handle it being populated as normal case, but I also have to handle it being filled in as not provided.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment on that? Yes, at the current state, that's correct, Angus. We can also apply further constraints to say you can't use missing data on particular elements. We can choose to do that and put that in the standard. Without that, it does indeed mean that that is what the standard says.
Well,
and keeping in mind, Angus, that no error doesn't mean that you can't raise processing errors.
I realize
you have to be able to parse it.
I realize I can reject it. Like I can. My system can go, yes, I realize this is you're not providing data, and I can then reject the order. However, I do that. Yep. But to be honest, my system today would just go, this structure isn't what I expected, and it would exception and fail, right? And this is saying I can't do that. I have to handle it. I have to handle having no data.
Don't get mixed up with handle. Handle's different. So no, basically you've got to accept without error.
No error.
All right. So you've got to be able to parse this message. And what you do from a business logic perspective after that is up to you. You can actually raise errors if they're part of your processing, but not as part of your parsing and acceptance.
So every mandatory field now needs two processing paths, the normal path and the it's not provided path. as well as just the default throws an exception because it's not what I expected.
So it's like bad error, right? Oh, sorry, bad request. 400 bad request.
Yeah.
You can't do 400 bad requests.
Yeah.
You can't
So
do
I have to handle it.
422.
I have, as a developer, I have to handle as a possible normal path. Like there's the normal path. You gave me the data. There's the path of you gave me something that said you didn't give me the data, even though it's mandatory. And then there's blow up because you gave me something that just was completely unexpected.
Yeah.
It just means you have to
I'll
be
go
able
back
to accept it, right? You don't need to do any processing on it. You just have to be
I
able
know,
to.
but I
receive
now
it.
have to write twice as much code across. I have to, for every element's mandatory, I have to handle when you fill it in with this other structure.
But you have to decide. You have to decide if you can still deal with it or not. Right?
So if
That's
we go
up to
back
you.
to,
I think
go
in
back to
practice,
that
it's just not
list.
going to happen. Like,
Can I just
Mm.
make a
Come on.
suggestion that we have another item to discuss the missing data, because I think this applies across everything, right? So
It'd make
I
a
think
nice
that's
connectathon breakout.
yeah, I think this is probably a topic in itself, because these obligations are defined in the fire spec, right? So we, like Danielle said, we can add additional detailing to say what can or can't do. But as kind of like the ways we've done before, if we do a first pass here, when we say this is the right obligation, we might need to further constrain that. And I think that missing or suppressed data is a conversation in itself that we need to have about how we're going to deal with that in eRequesting. So can we potentially have that as a separate
discussion?
I agree. I think it has to be used very lightly, like where you can do that.
Can you just go to the list on the next slide, please? So something like code, all it means is that it will have something like an unknown or it will have a missing code in code if it was missing. It will have a masked code in code.
And why would we let someone do that? What is the point of sending me something that says...
Can we maybe move it on so that we, because there is a valid conversation to have here. And we either have to do it now or we try and get through some more obligations, right? So I think missing data is a conversation itself.
Maybe go ahead and we'll try and get through this material, and then we will have to come back on this topic, right? For sure.
There are some real gotchas in that list that will break systems, and I can point those out at a later date.
Yeah, cool. All right. These are populative node obligations for a placer. So these are things that we expect may not be implemented by systems, but if you do implement them, you will populate the value. So we've got our list here: identifier, encounter, reason code, note, and insurance. Okay, so basically there may be systems that don't implement these, so we've given this opt-out of if known. But if you do have these concepts, we would expect the values to be populated.
I move we pass.
Thank you, Heath.
I'll second that again.
Oh, cool. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, if you would like to vote for the current motion to accept the proposal on your screen, please press the button now. All right, and we'll wrap that up in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so there was 34, 1 against, and 7 abstained. So that one is passed.
Cool. So we can.
Can I just make sure too that we got in the minutes the action item that we have to have a discussion on suppressed and missing data for future meeting?
I'll add it. Thanks.
Also, might be worth noting that the obligations in the slide don't quite match up with the obligation descriptions in the obligations list. So best to review those.
Yeah, it's an element of trying to simplify what they mean.
I'm just more getting at the point that I think we're following the ones in the list and not the ones on the slide, correct?
Well, the terms are defined. Yeah. Yeah.
as
Yeah.
they are defined. Yep.
Yeah.
We're just trying to make it a little bit easier to understand.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, next one.
Okay, fillers. So this is, our fillers who are getting these service requests. So here we've looked at the handle obligation, which is basically these elements should be considered when you process them. So we expect you to receive them, and we expect you, you would likely expect these to be populated at some point, and your system should pay attention to what's in them and decide whether to process them or how to handle them. So these are really highlighting the things we expect will be necessary to handle in some way. Andy.
So if a filler has access to a service request, which is owned and managed by the placer, then we're saying that there's a burden on the filler to handle the status, and we haven't defined what that means. So, for instance, if the status is cancelled, what are we expecting the filler to do? And
you're meant to consider the consequences of ignoring it.
No, you're not allowed to ignore it.
You have to do
literally
something with
handle
it.
is the
Yes,
converse
not allowed to
of
be ignored.
ignore. All right.
Yeah,
So
so you
if
you
we're
can't ignore it.
asking,
You have to consider it.
if we're
Yeah.
asking something to be done, then to agree that that's what I'm going to do, that I agree with this, then I kind of need to know what are you actually asking, because if what you're asking is actually not possible, then obviously you couldn't agree to this. If what you're asking is, yeah, that seems reasonable, then yep, I agree, handle it.
Yeah, but so because like in reality, if there's a code in there that you can't do, right, you will need to consider that.
Well, this one particularly has been an issue because of the semantics of the service request, which is in effect managed by the placer for the placer. This is not something that the filler's implication is necessarily well defined. So, if suddenly a service request moves midway through processing to an alternative status, what are you meant to do to handle it?
Whatever
and
you decide to do with it.
Yeah.
So we're not saying what you have to do, except that you have to do something. So you could actually raise an error. I don't know what to do with that. No, you're not allowed to do nothing.
But nothing is
something.
something.
You can't ignore it. You have to.
No. I don't ignore it. I'm just not going to do anything.
Yeah. That's okay because you've
that
considered
means for
the
all of these
consequences.
things, I can go.
Yeah.
I've decided to do nothing.
Yeah, you've processed it. Yeah, true. You've processed it, but that's on you, right? Yeah.
Unless
what if I haven't even like from the Sonic Genie one? I don't even process it, right? I do not even search for cancelled orders because I've got nothing to do with them. So I haven't even picked it up.
And what does it mean?
So
if
I'm
you
now
did?
failing, aren't I?
That's what you're not allowed to do, Angus. You're not allowed to ignore. All right.
So I have to search for it and then just ignore it. And then ignore it.
Well,
I've handled it by ignoring it.
You're choosing not to process it, right?
It's not saying that you have to search for it, though.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even search for it. So I don't handle it because I never even search for it. So you're saying I must search for it and then I must consider it and go do nothing.
No, there's nothing about searching for it. It just happens to be if you receive one of these things, you have to have some definition within your system of what happens. Now, it may be that you are absolutely going to do nothing with it.
Yeah. So say you searched for it and it came back with the wrong status, you would still have to handle it, right?
Wow, that's different again. We're talking about a status which is valid. Like the cancel status is valid, right? No one's arguing that's a valid status.
Yeah.
You're saying I must handle it. And I'm saying, well, I just don't do anything with it. I don't even search for it. So I don't even look at it. Is that handling
that is handling it.
That's handling it. Because I know about it. I just choose not to look for it.
You've excluded it from your actions.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
you're right. I have no problem if
You
a
haven't
placer
ignored-
sets it as cancelled. I will handle
Yeah.
that. The way I
Yeah.
handle it is
You
I don't
haven't-
even look at it.
You haven't ignored the element. You've ignored the action.
I
You've
have, as a
ignored
developer,
the
I have
request.
considered the element and made my decision on what I'm going to do.
Yeah. In fact, you have explicitly not
Yeah, I
ignored
have.
it
I
because
have.
you've done something on it. Yeah.
You are right. You're right in that
Yeah.
sense. It's weird.
All
It's
right.
just weird that handling just means you must have considered and made a choice of what to do.
All right.
Yeah.
So having
I,
said
I,
that,
I also get struggled here again with the missing data. So I have to. We're saying, and I have to handle the missing data. So if code is filled in with some sort of missing data, I have to handle that.
yeah,
And which you might reject.
yeah, you might.
Yeah,
say,
yeah, I understand.
I
I
don't
might
know what
reject
this
it.
code is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I understand.
But you just
I
have
don't like
to
the
deal with it.
idea that I now have to do double processing on every mandatory element.
I can't process an order without a subject. I
Yeah,
can't process an order without a
yeah, I know.
requester, but there are potentially use cases where this profile might be used for de-identified data.
Can I ask a question? That the missing data, I haven't looked heavily into the missing data thing. Is it the same pattern on everything? Like the missing data.
Can we come back to this one?
Yeah, I suppose. I've just found
Yeah,
a whole lot of
we'll
work I have to do that I never did.
Yeah, but we have to agree on how we.
Yeah, we have
process
to agree.
it, right?
Yeah, that's
So
right.
I think there is absolutely conversation there, and we can isolate that conversation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
quickly,
Well, I can't
there's
answer
two
this if I
patterns.
don't know. I don't know if I can handle it.
This is two patterns.
You're asking me to handle the missing data, and yet I don't even know what the missing data is.
It's a good point, Mark.
But we might say that we don't support missing data.
Well, then how can I make this
Well, we
decision?
already just did, but in the previous one, we've said that
Well, no,
it
that's the
is populate,
that's
which you may provide missing data.
But there is
Otherwise, it
nothing.
would be populate.
I think. Yeah.
What was the able to populate?
But they can still have missing data because it used to be able to populate it in some circumstances, not every circumstance. So
Yeah,
they can
I
still have
think-
missing data enabled to populate.
Yeah, because it's just like there is a decision to be made, but I don't think we need to make it right now. so it's
It's even more complicated with searching. Like, what if I'm searching for service requests for this patient, but the patient has got missing data on it, so I don't even see the service request?
I mean, I think here this doesn't have to be perfect, right? We're going to public comment, and then that's the channel. We need to basically move on to get something to go to comment with, and then you can consider the implications, and we can have some discussion at the Connectathon or maybe before. But we need to be able to get a starting point to have a discussion.
I think we need to at one stage roll through all these elements and decide whether you're allowed to put missing data in here. Because I think in 99% of the cases, it's just why? Why would you be allowed to? It'd be very rare.
Tawinda.
Regarding service request.code, it is a must support, but mandatory field is text. So if I'm just passing a free text inside it, does it mean that I have to pass missing data for codable concept?
No. Not where the well, that's
No.
possibly another question. Yeah, at the moment.
No, you're not allowed to, because that's not what that means. That's just free text only. Although it says the word code, that's an element name. It could say test name. It's not a data type.
It doesn't mean the code; it means the element of code.
Element of code, yeah. So unless we explicitly break out lower level obligations, it is text is okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So what have we voted on? We haven't voted on this. I forgot.
I'm not sure if I put a motion forward or not. If I haven't, I will.
Thank you.
I'll
Pete
second.
says yes. Michael says
One of the
yes
Michaels.
also.
Yeah, just say Michael. Get both of us.
Hello.
All right. If you would like to
Thanks, Chris.
vote for the current motion, which is to accept the proposal on your screen, the buttons are up now.
So just to confirm, Michael, able to populate, you cannot provide missing data.
There are some conditions under which it populates the element.
But
Correct.
you cannot provide missing data.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, to me, in some circumstances, not
Depends.
all
You have to be able
circumstances,
to. Yes.
not all.
All right, I'm going to close the
You
voting
wouldn't
for
do.
this one in
Yeah,
3,
she's
2,
Thanks, Chris.
1. And that one is 25 for,
Okay.
2 against, and 12 abstained. So that is passed.
All right. Maybe we move on. So this is the other part of filler, the other elements. So this is the least we can do, a no error obligation, which is if you get data in these elements, we expect you to receive them without error, and they may be ignored, but that's obviously up to you and your business in terms of whether you ignore them or not. So, basically, so this is really the least a consumer can do in terms of accepting the data that we've indicated we expect to be present, with our must supports. So this is really just covering off the other must supports that were defined so far.
Does anyone have any
move.
questions? Moved? Great.
Honestly, hang on. just look at it before we move. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Anyone like to second?
Thanks.
I'll second.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay. If you'd like to vote for the current motion on your screen, please press the buttons. All right, so we're closing that one in 3, 2, 1. And that one is passed. 28 for, 1 against, 7 abstained. Thank you.
As
Chris,
one of the biggest fillers in this room, I voted negative on all those filler ones because you're not telling me what I have to handle no data on, and yet you're telling me I have to handle them all. I realize I've lost the vote, but I'm just putting that out there. I think you have to define which elements can have valid no data before you can make me decide on whether I can handle them.
Would you like to put together a proposal, Angus, and put that in Confluence?
Yeah, put if you think
I just think we need for each of these elements for those last 3 slides, we need to be making decisions on whether you can provide a no data thing. And once that's clear, then I can vote on these.
I think that might be a good topic for the working group session at the face-to-face, or a breakout at the Connectathon, because I think we'll be able to.
It might be when's the close of the ballot, because we need to do it before the close of ballot.
You can do that anyway. We will keep progressing work. There's just a certain point in time at which we've only gotten to so far that puts it in ballot for comment, and we will continue to progress with the things that we've already identified that we need to continue on with.
So the ones you need to worry about, Angus, are the mandatory items, because they're the ones that will have to be turned into missing codes or extensions.
Why not the optional
ones? The optional ones you don't have to worry about, because you'll never get anything for a missing because it's not populated.
Won't people doing the right thing say, I have this, but I can't provide it to you, so I'm going to put missing data? And they might be, that's people doing the right thing. They probably won't do the right thing and they just won't give it to you.
If we put populated onto an optional attribute, though, then that would create that situation.
But that's not what the standard says. So it's not what AU Core says. AU Core says you shall not provide something that is missing or suppressed.
hang on. I think you're talking about the optional things. So the
Yes.
rules for missing data are if you don't have the value for the element and it's optional, you shall not populate that element.
Exactly.
That's that rule.
That's why I'm saying you only have to worry about the list that was stated as populate for mandatory elements.
All right, I'm going to call this here.
Yeah. Chris has to end the
argument
meeting.
is basically between the co-chairs, and you guys are all having a chat again in an hour and a half or half an hour. So we can continue that there and get it resolved before we bring that back to everybody. So just a reminder of the forthcoming meetings. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to finish the 3 remaining obligations today, but hopefully we'll get through them quite quickly next meeting. That always seems to be the way it works. So we've got... we're currently on the 18th of July. We have the 23rd and the 2nd. So there are 2 more meetings. The next meeting we're finishing system obligations, and then we have the 2nd of August to do anything that is left that we want to get done before the ballot for comment is published on the 5th. So
just check. I'm pretty sure it's the 1st of August. I think the 2nd of August is a Friday.
Yeah, there is one of these slides is out. I think it's this one.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, you're right.
Yep,
You're
it is
all right.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, awesome, thanks.
1st of August. Okay, 23rd July, 1st of August. We'll see you all again at the next meeting. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.